Dang, have to behave.
All right, everybody, I guess I'll announce this. This is the fourth meeting of the DefCore committee for the elephant cycle. Been our first one in a while, and I'll start by apologizing for the late hour if you are in the East Coast. Joshua's been having a very busy week, but we didn't want to delay. So even now, he'll be joining us at the bottom of the hour. So there's been a lot of good activity, and I think it's important for us to stage things up before we meet for those people who can meet on March 3rd. And then I'm going to try and shift these back to the mornings so that we're more friendly to European time zones. We originally alternated, and I regret that we've been so afternoon heavy. All right. Any other comments or items to add for the agenda before we move forward? I took out the review RefStack use cases. I think that we had a sub-team meeting, or we did actually talk about this. It's been something that's being handled by the RefStack by the RefStack team specifically, and they're working towards a very narrow set of use cases, which I'll talk through when I talk about what we're gonna demo and what we're hoping to get going. So I took that one off the menu, the agenda. And Troy, are you able to talk briefly cuff about the capabilities groupings that you did?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so since the last call, I've been sort of focused on the API details summary from the spreadsheet around the Tempest coverage, and trying to sort of whittle that down from the 700 some odd test cases into a set of capabilities that might be easier to do some ranking around. I took an original pass at that a couple weeks ago, and then yesterday I went back and started doing some comparison of the list I came up with the API docs for each of the services as well, and refined things down a little bit, and also changed some of the naming on what I did for the capabilities to kind of specifically call out admin and extension items that are separate from sort of the base API for each of the products. I think I've still got to probably take another pass through that to make sure I've got some consistency there, and just see where we are. It was kind of nice to see that it was easy to do a correlation between what was in the Tempest tests and what was in the docs. I think, so the one question or I guess the thing that stood out at me as I went through it that I'd love to get some advice on how we want to think about things are, particularly when it relates to sort of the base APIs, which tend to be fairly thin. A lot of, I think, the edge case capabilities end up being in extensions. I kind of went back and forth about how much I tried to break down the base API into capabilities and how meaningful it was to think about them as separate capabilities. Like, would we contemplate, for instance, a core that included compute, but maybe not, the images capabilities within the compute API, as opposed to some of the other extensions. And so you'll see, because since the compute API was a little bit more fleshed out and had more stuff in it, I still separate out sort of servers from images and flavors in terms of capabilities within compute. But for instance, on networks, I just left the base API described as networks and didn't try to go more granular than that. So I guess that's kind of the question I have about how much we want to distinguish kind of capabilities within the base APIs for each of the projects as a separate capability versus focusing capabilities more around the base APIs and the extensions and the admin features. I don't know if there's any thoughts about that, or if that's just something people want to think about and we can talk about when we get together next time.
I suspect that when we go through the next agenda item, that will help clarify your question.
Okay, that may be. So what I'm gonna continue to do is try to refine this. It'd be great if anybody else got a chance to look and see if they think some obvious things are missing. It looked like somebody took the work after the first pass I did and actually built a capabilities tab that's in the Google Docs spreadsheet and kind of put up a sample of what a scoring mechanism might begin to look like. So I may have some work to do to go update that capabilities spreadsheet to match some of the refinement that I've done on the API details page, and so that's something I'm going to be working on between now and when we get together on the 3rd, I think it is.
Right, and that was Josh and I, and that's the next item on the agenda.
Okay.
So Troy, this is Alan. You've probably already discussed this in another meeting, but I was looking at your spreadsheets as you were working along here, and saw that initial list of all those Tempest tests. I was amazed at how quickly you translated those down into these short list of capabilities. Can you describe a little bit more your thought process on how you went through that list so quickly and were able to lump those together as capabilities? Is it just basic knowledge that you had, that you worked from, experience, or was there some criteria or something you worked from?
Well, the good news is that there's a lot of information between, so if you look at the spreadsheet and the whole thing, there is component, file name, and test case name, which all have pretty good clues. If you just take the very first set of things, they're all grouped together in a test file named test aggregates, and then if you look at the test case name, you sort of see aggregates there. So there was a lot of good clues, I think, just in the basic names that were there. And I would say that sort of combined with just my unfamiliarity of the projects and how they work and how the pieces have evolved, particularly in Nova, where I've spent a fair amount of time understanding it. I guess it was fairly easy to kind of do. To me, it was pretty easy to look at those names and then assign one. I would say I found some mistakes, and as I've refined it, I've found some places to continue to improve on that, and that's why I want to take another pass through it. Because sometimes those hints don't end up being exactly right if you dig a little bit lower. But generally, it was the combination of taking the component, the file name, and the test case name, and because they're grouped by file names, you tend to find a lot of the capabilities grouped together. And so it was rare that I would get, say, find fixed IPs up here and then find fixed IPs later and have to go back and correlate between them. There's a few of those cases, but it ends up the outliers weren't that hard, and so therefore it wasn't that difficult to get through it.
Thank you. That was very helpful, because I was trying to figure that out from your spreadsheets, and I couldn't follow it. So that was very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
When Josh and I went through the scoring activity, we were just stunned with how confident with that. It was really helpful. I have to really shout out that made what we tried to do so much more coherent. So. Yeah,
it had to be. Trying to do that ranking thing on that full complete list would have been, which was our first reaction. I think when we all saw that list was like, oh my gosh, how are we going to use this? But anyway,
yeah, that was my reaction.
Well, and I want to wrap this, and then we'll jump into that because I excited. Joshua and I, after we did the initial pass audit, were really happy. I'm speaking for Josh a little bit, but both of us came out of that saying, this is really useful. So taking the capabilities, and Troy, I think it's a neat idea to keep refining them, because I don't think it's going to be hard to reconcile the scoring work with further refinements. But between the capabilities and some of the scores and actually just building this table up, we're really doing something that's useful to our community outside of DefCore, was our opinion. And it'll be wrong in places, but it's going to be helpful, I think, to users to be able to go and see this capability has these tests, and this, and then we'll go down from there.
Yeah, I think when you look, this is the first chance I've really had to look. I knew the spreadsheet was there, and I didn't get a chance to really sit through it the other day, but you can really start to see how this. Well, I think it does two things. It is a great synopsis of the capabilities that are there. when you finally see them all kind of grouped together. Because I've been kind of down in the weeds of it, and I think you start to see how the scoring mechanism it just brings the ideas we've talked to, I think, into much easier grasp.
Yes, that was the other comment that we made at the end of it. It's like, we're not crazy. This might work. That has been a lingering concern to me, my own mind. So. All right. Well, let's jump to that since we're talking pretty freely about it. And if somebody doesn't mind taking notes in the background while I'm giving people a tour of what we did. So earlier this week, Josh and I sat down and we spent 2 hours on this. We took the capabilities list and we started looking at tests and it was just overwhelming. So we decided to just try and score capabilities as a manageable set. And we took the capabilities that we lined out, and there's I thought we did. I put a link in here to there's actually a Etherpad page somewhere in here for the capabilities. It's criteria. Nope, I don't know where it is. Okay, there it is. Okay, so let me throw this link in. So if you haven't seen, there's the other link. So the DefCore criteria has these 13. Everyone gets 14. It's the bingo. It's the center of the bingo chart. But what we did was we took these criteria. We tried to come up with words that we didn't have to keep looking up for what they meant. For now, we just did a flat scoring, and then it's binary whether or not you get this or not. Then the score multiplies up, and we calculate a preliminary score. If we put a 0, we every cell we review, we actually put a score in. So if it's not reviewed, it's blank. Otherwise, it's 1, 0. And the 1.5 we felt was contentious enough that we didn't want to make a guess. So that was 0.5 is reserved for future discussion. And then what we did was we deliberately went through and picked. The reason the counts are highlighted is we wanted to find things that had enough tests to be reasonable, but we picked a couple of things that didn't have enough tests so that we could validate the process. For the most part, we worked in popular capabilities downwards, and the results were really interesting. We got some things that confirmed that the scores are the things that seemed like they would be no-brainers to us were no-brainers, like compute servers. Things that were not as clear to us seemed to come out pretty clearly not in. And then we got some things that were more on the bubble, and you could actually see that they were more on the bubble. And then you also had some capabilities like, and we actually tried to go pretty far down. So we object store container, object store object, and those came up with pretty high scores in some cases based on what our criteria for selection were. Which reminds me of an agenda item that I want to make sure I cover, which is about TC items.
Rob, what's the count? Is the count the number of tests?
Yes.
That's what I thought. Okay.
So when Troy did the capability score, he had clusters, and the count is the number of tests in the cluster or in the capability.
Yeah. And I couldn't quite figure out how you calculated the score. Did you just take each one and multiply it by 8?
Yes. Yeah. So up here is the weighting, and
right.
So it uses the weight from the top. So we might say, look, we want stable to be more important than complete, and
right.
that will change that. That's a later step. For now, we used even weighting because it was pretty straightforward consensus. And with some of the stuff I was able to score, like whether it's a public API, you can judge those really quickly if they have the word admin in them. And the other thing that we did we lose this? We might have lost some of it. So what we were trying to, as we found supporting information, we would, these got lost when we cut this over. So we cut the spreadsheet over late, but we'd been trying as we had comments to include the references and the materials and things like that. Unfortunately, looks like those didn't survive the cut and paste exercise. That's why this is the link to that. Darn it. Wonder if there's a way to export. We'll look at that later. So overall, we felt that there's still a significant amount of work to do. We found that we got progressively faster, and that the first one took took almost an hour, 45 minutes, and then we were getting progressively, exponentially faster to a point where some of these were going down in 2 or 3 minutes once we were used to the criteria scoring. And I think if we had a knowledgeable group, we could move very quickly, especially because the things that weren't clearly yes and clearly no, we could flag for further discussion. And once we got into that pattern, it was pretty straightforward. However, one of the things that we had ultimately got to thinking was that if we had a way to allow community participation in this, it would create an even more interesting result for it. And some of the scoring is going to be obviously controversial. Probably based on what we saw, less than 20% are going to be controversial, I think.
Really?
Less than 20% of, not of the capabilities themselves, but of the scores within the overall grid. So
are not, or are, which way
are
are you saying
20%
that?
are controversial. 80%,
Oh.
I think 80% are going to walk. We're going to be able to just say yes, 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 and then we're going to hit, every other test. You're going to find one thing that people don't agree to. But if at that point, if it's one criteria that people are arguing about, we throw in a 0.5 and we keep moving. And that process seems to allow us to move. You don't end up rat-holed in. I'm not sure about the future direction of compute aggregates. Let's not argue about it. We're just going to give it a 0.5 for now and come back. Because if it doesn't take it, if it doesn't tip the balance, tip the scale, it doesn't matter. We don't have to spend an hour arguing over whether compute aggregates are the future direction or not.
So, Rob, when you were looking at the scores, were you kind of seeing that there would be a cutoff point, so that if it was below that, it's probably not even worth arguing about, or what are you using this? How are you interpreting the score?
Great question. We blindly picked, I think, 70 or 75 as the score point. It was just blind. We don't have picking the cutoff number. Where I hope will emerge out of scoring everything and figuring out the weights. But so not yet. We just want something because we felt that 70 was representative enough that we could highlight things that were clearly yes. But Alan, it's a great question. I would intentionally hold it until we had more data.
Well, but I think it's a good point because we could get caught up arguing one of the criteria on one of these capabilities, and we'd just be wasting time because the score is going to be so low anyway. It doesn't matter, right? So it'll help us filter it down to that 20%.
Right, and that's I think once people have gone through the process, just like Joshua and I got much faster. Once you see how it sort of ranks out, you learn it's not worth arguing for 8 points necessarily. It became surprisingly streamlined. but we need more expertise. This is the big bottleneck for us. It would be
the one
great
thing, Rob,
to
just
sit
from
down.
looking at this,
Yeah.
that I think we should keep in mind is particularly on the test count place, we'll need to have, I think, some way to kind of balance out the number of tests versus sort of the breadth of the capability. And what I mean by that is, so compute servers pause is it's basically there's a pause and an unpause and a couple of negative things around that. And the fact that it has 3 tests compared to, say, compute servers, which has 73, isn't necessarily helpful because compute servers includes, a vastly larger number of computation calls, right? So I don't know how we think about that, but it just occurs to me that there's almost this concept of sort of coverage as opposed to just raw test numbers, and that is maybe something we have to think about over time.
There is a cluster score that has a coverage element in it.
Okay.
But yeah, yes, and we should all expect that some of these criteria might be unnecessary, and we might find some that are missing, and we're going to have to go back and revisit. What I'm expecting to happen is we'll do a pass on the criteria. For Havana, we might actually just have to have all the tests under each capability inherit those scores blindly, and then refine it from there when we see there's actual issues. Once again, we're back to the iterative approach. We're solving the solvable problem, and then figuring out where we have edge cases that didn't fit.
One other point I'd like to.
I think what I really like about it is, and this is sort of going back to Alan's point, if you take the mechanism you talked about, which is, get the obvious data in, my guess is then you're really going to narrow down the places that we have to go dig further. Because you're going to have some, like you said, there's going to be some that are obviously in and some that are obviously out. And then, when you look at admin tenants and it's got a 65, then maybe that 0.5 is really worth discussing. But, on like stacks where you've got 1.5 on something that's only got a 27, chances are it doesn't even make sense, right?
Right, exactly.
And you really minimize the places you have to dig deep and sort of hammer through the contention.
One point that I think is important to also just keep in mind for the future is that anytime you have something measured and there's something that's dependent upon that measure, there's also an incentive to game things. And so I'm not sure what the answer is there, because if one of the important things is that we're going to be measuring is the number of tests, it's easy to generate a lot of tests that are functionally worthless. And I'm not necessarily saying that people will do that, but I think that we need to keep that in mind as just something to flag for the future.
Hey, I'm glad you're bringing up that point. I agree. One of the expectations that I have is that the criteria weighting might change cycle to cycle or release set to release set. So it's possible that in Icehouse we find that the test coverage is not a good criteria and we reduce its weight, or it might be the opposite. And so I hopefully what we can do is if we find gaming like that we can push the gaming into places that are favorable. That we want people doing the contributions, or we want people creating more coverage, and adjust the rule set. I think you're right to bring it up.
I would love to find a way to get more people to submit Tempest tests. I mean, I say that mostly based on the fact that they still have to be reviewed and accepted by the Tempest community, so you can't just play completely meaningless. But I think, in my mind, that was one of the things that sort of stood out to me. It really felt like going through the list that our coverage overall was pretty thin. And it's a good place to start from, but that was one of the ahas for me, just having to dive into the details of this. At least it felt.
Hey, Troy. Troy, I would say that it takes companies like Yahoo to start digging in and working on things that aren't necessarily immediately important to them to make that happen. And once we get enough momentum, that test coverage is much like bug fixing. It's important, and so I know that I haven't been successful so far within Yahoo to the B team who runs Tempest internally to get them motivated to do this yet. So I'm going to continue to bang the drum, but it's it's just part of what we need to instill as part of the culture. There's some things that you need to pay your dues, and test coverage and bug fixing should be synonymous.
That too.
Yeah.
So
one of the things that I think we need to be ready for, though, is it's like learning you need to do a workout program, right? Before you have the buff, healthy body that you want, you're going to have to admit you're overweight and need to get in shape. I think there's a little bit of a mirror that this is going to hold up for us, and we need to focus on the goal of having the coverage up, and there's going to be a little bit of a spotlight where we are going to be showing up places where we need to bulk up a little bit.
Rob, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say this is a tiny bit self-serving, but my way of trying to instill that bug fixing and documentation is important is to integrate it in with the community training that we're working on. Right now we're getting into the development training guide and the CI pipeline, and understanding that the test coverage within the pipeline is really a big focus. We're going to start working on the architect's guide in probably about June. Perhaps that's just another thing we add in, that we make Tempest test development and updating part of that architect's guide. So, I mean, it's my small way of making it happen, but it's obviously people will have to follow it and run the training to make it work.
To me, it's a great on-ramp. So if you include it there and explain that this is the way to learn how the process works, I think it's a good starting point.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that we're inherently creating, we're gamifying adding tests as a positive. That to me is the hopeful outcome. Is that it's a place where people feel like they can show contribution. And we have to make sure that they're real contributions, not just line of code contributions.
So, Rob, as we go through each of these capabilities, each of these rows, I guess, there's going to be a lot of discussion and a lot of information that's discussed.
Yep.
We're going to say, hey, we're going to give cluster a 0 because of X, right? How are you proposing that we record that? Because that should, like you said, should turn into new tests or blueprints or whatever type of information. This needs to be docked or whatever. We need to be able to record that and track it.
That's a great question.
Do you want to talk about the comment?
Otherwise, when we come back in 6 months, right, we get to the next release, we have to rediscover that to figure out if that capability is now ready to be part of core or not. And we'll end up rehashing stuff we've rehashed before.
That's why we were making pretty good. Josh, you joined?
Yeah, I'm in. Sorry I was late. I had the briefing for the first half.
No worries. And we were trying to make notes and comments as we went for this, so that there was a record of our discussion and links and things like that. And I would suggest that as we get through this process, that if somebody wants a score to go from a 0 to a 1 or a 1 to 0, that before we discuss it, people are going to have to have a commentary or a thread on any change item release to release. And that's part of what we end up with as use cases for RefStack work, is to be able to have almost a community thread on these item by item things. But yeah, Alan, it's going to be an interesting. We could consume a lot of cycles talking about these.
Well, yeah, but my point being, if we think something should be core, but it's not, then we got to say, okay, it's not for these reasons, and then those should turn into, bugs or something that we can track. And
I think we should be careful about letting the tail wag the dog. I mean, I think we've determined criteria and said we will score capabilities based on this criteria, and if the criteria doesn't make the cutoff, then it's not core. Whether we feel personally it should or shouldn't be core is not a committee activity. It might be a personal activity, and we as individuals or anyone else in the world should go and create blueprints to address those. But I don't think that falls back on the committee, because I don't want us to be seen to have two standards: the standard of things we believe ought to be core, and then the standards of things the criteria are telling us is or is not in.
So, yeah, I agree, Josh. Actually, you're right. I agree. But I will go back to my previous statement and say that is information we don't want to lose and have to rediscover every 6 months.
Yes, very, very true. Very true. And it's also something that Rob and I were pointing out we're going to have to defend in every conversation we have. I mean,
Yep.
if we had a tool for it, and we might end up with one, we may end up, using source control commits every time we change one of those scores, and have an appropriate commit message that says this was marked to 0.5 because of XYZ, see other related threads here. I don't think we have to do that for the V1, except for things that are going to be contentious. I don't think we have to be able to defend every score, but I think we will have to defend the changes to scores in the future. At least I hope so.
Along those lines, though, I think it's much more defensible to do it in such a granular way than what we had been trying to do, which is, I think Swift is core, I don't. Right?
Yeah.
We're back to it's a bigger problem space, but the conversations are much more tractable.
Yes.
There was
+1.
something important that was said, though, and I'm not sure. I think it deserves further discussion. That is, it's easy for this sort of criteria scoring to make it clear whether something is out. But there is an unstated assumption that if something scores high on the criteria, that it is automatically in. Is this?
No.
Is this some place where we want to say, whatever the magic score is, according to the criteria, if you hit the score, you're in. You're core.
No.
And I think that's not a. To me, I'm not comfortable saying that. I think that this is better as an exclusionary tool only, and as an input to what the final definition is.
Correct. No, this is not this. No, because the decision lies with the board, right? So this is going to be a tool to be able to create a recommendation to the board to make a decision on.
Absolutely. I just wanted to make that point because
your point's good.
It sounded like there was an assumption that, hey, if something makes it up above the thing, then it's core. I'm not sure that we want to say that, at least not yet.
I think that's a really good clarification. So let's take that as a note that we should call them candidates, not final authority. I think that makes sense. It's good.
I was going to put that as a header on column A, but I don't have rights.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we didn't want people changing it.
Yeah, don't give me rights. You go ahead and change it. I don't want to mess it up.
Do we have a title for that instead of score?
No, I was looking at column A, not C.
Oh.
A be candidates.
Like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just looking through our previous notes on the test criteria development, and I think you're right. This was, when we proposed criteria, they were evaluating proposed passing tests that would then be presented. However, the gray area that I want to be a little more clear on, and Rob and I had discussed this in the first two DefCore meetings, is the proposal is for DefCore committee to submit a slate vote to the board, and not necessarily to have a board vote for every separate criteria, because 75 separate criteria at the board level is going to be crazy. So I think the criteria is intended to inform the DefCore committee discussion, and we should endeavor to put forward the best slate possible. And then if we have a series of amendments that the board wants to propose, we're going to have to work through that at the board level. But I think making it a slate as opposed to here are 75 individual board votes is going to be like intractable.
I for one, I agree with these being candidates. I would suggest that if we have more than a couple, I would like to say any, but if we have more than a couple of exceptions, then we're going to have to reevaluate the whole score and weights, right? There's a lot of knobs to turn in this so that we can look at things, right? So we might find that we have to adjust weights to get cutoffs and where the cutoff is to get the candidates to an acceptable state. But if we have candidates that we feel like we have to reject, even though they score highly, we really need to scratch our heads on that. That either we got the criteria wrong, or there's a missing criteria in our list, or something like that. Because one of the things that surprised us in this was that I don't know about surprised, because when we thought about it, it wasn't surprising. But the Swift tests were above our preliminary threshold, right? And when we sat back and looked at the criteria, it made sense on the criteria. And if somebody wanted to say, yes, but I don't think this underlying capability should be in core, then we're really talking about a criteria that we missed. There's something that somebody's saying to justify that we need to express as a criteria. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I'm nervous that we're going to come back and still have people trying to push a test in or out without stating their rationale. As long as the rationale is stated, I'm fine.
I think that you're right. I think that pushback is, if there's some other reason why we say if there's something that's not being effectively captured, we want to try and capture it. I completely agree with that. I've been bitten in the past by this, by being too mechanistic. That maybe
I completely agree with you, and I'm happy to have a safety valve. Yes. But that actually brings up an item that I put on the topic, which was an update about the TC. And if it's all right with everybody, I'd like to close this topic. We need another working meeting to go into it further, and we'll try and do it with we'll announce it and invite a bigger audience. Josh and I just wanted to make sure that we were not insane and this could be done. And I at least have validated that I am sane. I'm still pending a decision on my partner.
Hey, there is no evidence to suggest I am sane, nor have I ever made such an assertion.
The jury rests. The defense rests.
So, Rob, before you leave this, how are you proposing that we attack this list and fill in all of these criteria?
Elbow grease. One at a time.
It's interesting. Once Josh and I got into the rhythm of it, we were knocking them out in a minute or two. We got a team of people who had enough expertise. I think in a 2-hour meeting, we would be 80% complete.
So you're proposing that we just, as a committee, go through them together, not break them apart and have people take one or two lines apiece or whatever, and then just argue the differences, or you're thinking we can just knock them out as a group?
The discussion and process is really helpful, and so I think that we might be able to subdivide them after we've trained a group of people, but once you get rolling, they move.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the more we have the consistent experience and knowledge of the people involved by going through it all together, the better. Like, eventually, I could see where, as some of those baselines are established, you may be able to divide and conquer a bit more.
Right.
It'd be great to do it together. And I think the way you circumvent the time issue is the way you guys have denoted the further discussion. Then you can come back or maybe subdivide the further discussion items later if there's a lot of. First pass would be great to have everybody together, or a fairly large number together.
Okay, so we're going to have to do that next week. We'll find a time in the morning, probably something like Tuesday or Thursday morning, to cover these as a working session. And we can record it, and we'll get the community involved, do all the good stuff we're supposed to do. Before I jump to the TC pieces, I wanted to converge the RefStack update with the idea of what I'm hoping to demo to the board. I did present this to the RefStack team, so this is pretty much a paste from what I showed in the meeting. Boy. If you're not familiar with Teacup, we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but we broke RefStack into two integrated pieces. One of them is this Tempest container upload from Probe, or Teacup, which is a containerized version of Tempest that you can point at a cloud, collect the results of running all the Tempest tests that are set inside that container, and then it uploads it to RefStack. So it's a way of collecting community data. And the idea here is that we can allow this almost becomes an OpenStack thing. We're starting to move it into the Garrett release process and stuff like that. But I'm hoping at the board meeting to show the board members how to use it. Alan, I don't necessarily want to take up agenda time, but we do need a little bit of time to say, hey, we're expecting people to do this, so that we have a limited test pool where people are trying to use this process and see where it works. And then the demo is, here's how Teacup works, and then the results get posted up to RefStack. And so all we're trying to do is show that you can collect data from the field, from a cloud, internal or external, and then upload the results and have RefStack collect them. We're not at the point where we can do analysis and parse the results or anything like that. That's a tractable problem, and we're not gating on people learning how to do it, because we'll add it as a feature. So the main things we want to show is the Teacup works and that you can upload, and then I have a goal to show it as private and public, so a DevStack test and then a public cloud test. DreamHost volunteered. I was going to use my Rackspace credentials too.
We'll do one of the public Piston clusters as well.
Cool. So what we might want to be able to do is have different. So Josh, you and I can both show up and run it.
Yes, and also as far as the generation of scorecard stuff, that was already working in a previous revision of RefStack, so I'm not too concerned about getting it working again after uploading. I agree, it probably won't be demoable on the 4th.
Our concern is that we can start getting the communities collecting data, and once we have that, that's going to take a lot more effort to get worked out and trained and documented and updating websites. So we saw that as the long pole. Questions? All right.
I put you on the agenda.
Yay. So I'm going to cover face-to-face next, and then we'll do TC, because I don't want to. I'm going to run out of time. Face-to-face meeting. So the board meeting is on March 4th in Santa Clara. We had talked about having a face-to-face DefCore meeting. We'll open a bridge for it also, but Joshua, I was hoping you could host, Piston could host a 2-hour
Yep.
meeting, like from 3 to 5.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Excuse me, this is Mark Radcliffe. The board meeting is actually in Palo Alto. It's at our offices. But not,
Okay.
no
Sorry,
big deal.
Palo Alto.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, if you want to see if we can host the DefCore meeting here, we can do that too. But I don't know if I need to know a little bit more about how many people you'd having. But we're right off 101, so I'm indifferent.
I'm just as happy to do it with in Piston because there's a Dev RefStack meeting before that. So I'm actually planning an all day RefStack DefCore Love Fest.
Okay.
But the actual committee meeting would be just the last 2 hours. So
Okay.
I appreciate
Sorry.
it.
Rob, can I double check the day that we're talking about?
Yeah.
We're talking about the
Monday.
March the 3rd, right? Awesome, good. Yeah, we're booked. I have 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. booked here for the boardroom. So.
Okay.
Right.
Josh, is there parking there?
There's a parking garage a couple of blocks away. It's expensive but not horrible. And then there's also BART is about a block away, and so folks coming from the South Bay can park and ride from Millbrae. That's probably the best way to park.
Yeah, they have an enormous parking structure in Millbrae. It's the way we frequently get into the city. Or are you guys close enough? Could we get there from the Caltrain station?
Yeah, it's about 10, 15 minutes walk from Caltrain. I do it a lot. I also do it on my bike. So again,
Okay.
Bringing your bike up, and then we have bike locking in the basement of the building. You'll just need to coordinate with me in the morning because it's key code access to the basement to the bike lockers.
Yeah. So this is Mark. I'm only going to come for I'm only going to come for the committee meeting unless you guys tell me otherwise. Yeah.
This is Van. Would you mind sending out Piston's address information? I'm going to be there for the DefCore meeting, and so I want to make sure I go to the right place.
Sure, we'll put it in the DefCore Elephant 4.
Right.
Or DefCore Elephant 5, I guess, rather. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we will have call-in for people who can't join face-to-face. Just try and take advantage.
Yeah, but you can't have whiskey over the phone.
All right, so
That's not true. There's an app for that.
if you were joining the meeting by phone, you were required to have a beverage. We can solve this problem. Bring beverages and drink with us. All right. Let's do a brief update on the TC.
Okay, I got to run, guys. Good update. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks, man. Talk to you
Appreciate
soon. Cheers.
This is probably a topic in itself. I'll do this as a status update instead of a discussion, if that's okay. There are two topics that we're tracking with the TC, and I think we're seeing good engagement. Or actually, we're seeing excellent engagement. The first one is the TC is working to define the core principles designated sections of code, and they're going through the process to figure out what that means, because we intentionally left it vague for the TC to define. And then once they figured out what it means, which sections are designated. That's going to take some time. There's been some initial proposals.
Rob, you're breaking up pretty badly. Is that on your side or on the conference line?
What do you mean?
Oh, you're fine now. We just couldn't understand you. You're gone all bubbly.
Darn it. Probably, I don't know. Anyway, so I'm engaged with the TC. I've been going to the meetings. we're actually getting I think there's a good dialogue started back and forth. Hopefully other people are stepping forward and also joining. And that dialogue started in response to the less resolved discussion about programs versus projects. My update from that, and Josh was on that one too, was initially there's a misunderstanding on the way we're using some of these words, and so the DefCore discussions had been very focused around programs, sort of as this high-level construct with a limited, where OpenStack had these big islands of functionality, sort of like islands, that we had thought that were the programs, and that you'd have projects inside of those islands of functionality, and the TC was using the definition that way, but also to mean teams and how people were teamed and working together. So there was some discussion, although I don't know if it was final, to have the TC use team instead of program in certain cases, but that's not all resolved yet. I have been slow in trying to redefine that. We do have some action items out of DefCore to come up with some recommendations and actually say, all right, this is the problem we're trying to solve, because the word program is so overloaded right now that we don't talk about the problem, we talk about the linguistics. And so that's still pending. I'd like to put it on the agenda for the face-to-face and see if we can make some progress. Because as a reminder, is a joint TC meeting only at the summit, or is it also, is it also at in March? Alan?
I think that's only at the summit.
Okay.
There we go. Sorry, I was on mute. It's only at the summit.
Okay. So the update is that there's progress on the designated section. And anybody who has the time to participate in this, I think it's a really interesting dialogue, and would love to have more DefCore people participating. And then from the program versus projects, I think we have to go back to objectives and lexicon, and we'll talk about that in the next agenda, if that's all right.
Yep, makes sense.
Okay, so with that, I would conclude the meeting. Is there a second?
I will second that.
Okay. Everybody, thank you for participating. Once again, I'm sorry for the late time, but I felt like it was important.
It was
Great
important.
work,
This was a
guys.
good meeting. Thanks.
Very good work.
Thanks, Rob.
Kudos to Troy.
Grinding it out. Thanks, Rob.
Day at a time. Yeah.
Bye.